Let's get this show on the road. We're diving deep into Brazil's LGPD today, their data protection law. We'll figure out what it all means for businesses like yours. Now, data privacy might not sound super exciting, but stick with us. It's way more than just checking off some legal boxes, you know.
Totally. We're really talking about building that solid trust with your customers. And let's be real, who wants to deal with those huge fines? No one.
Exactly. So to help us break it all down, we've got this doc from Lumos LLC. They're a consulting firm that eat, sleep, and breathe LGPD compliance. It's kind of like their sales pitch, but honestly, it's packed with good info. They start by hitting on the problem, and I think a lot of businesses are going to relate to this. It's like, where do you even begin with this whole LGPD thing? What data do you even have? And then, do you need a DPO, like a data protection officer?
Yeah, it can definitely feel like you're drowning in a sea of regulations, but that's why understanding the WHY behind this law is so important.
Right, because it's not just some like abstract legal mumbo jumbo, right?
Exactly. Not following the rules can really hit you where it hurts your wallet. We're talking fines of up to 2% of your annual revenue in Brazil. And get this, those fines can reach a crazy $50 million.
No kidding. That's a serious chunk of change. And even beyond the fines, think about what it does to your reputations. Like in today's world, one data breach, you're making headlines. And suddenly, customer trust out the window.
It's true. Damage to your reputation can actually cost you way more in the long run than any fine. So how does Lumos LLC think we should solve this whole LGPD puzzle?
Well, they've got a whole bunch of services to help businesses become compliant. And get this, they actually want to help build what they call a culture of security. That's pretty cool, right? One of the first things they talk about is data mapping.
Which is basically like taking inventory of all the personal data your business handles. I mean, you can't protect something if you don't even know you have it, right?
Makes total sense.
Yeah.
And they offer this thing called a gap analysis.
Right. So with that, they look at what you're doing now. They compare it to what the LGPD says you should be doing. Then they point out where you're falling short.
Ah, so it's like a report card for how well you're protecting data.
Exactly. And from there, they'll help you come up with an action plan to fix those gaps. You might need to update your privacy policies, for example, or implement some tougher security measures, or even train your employees on how to handle all that sensitive information.
You know, that training part seems super important. Because, let's face it, a lot of data breaches happen because someone messed up, not because of some hacker mastermind.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. You can have the best security system in the world, but if someone clicks on a phishing email or forgets their laptop at a coffee shop, game over.
Right. Makes you think. So we've got the data mapping, the gap analysis, the action plan. What else is in their toolkit?
Well, they can help with implementing those security measures, of course, and updating all those internal processes and documents. They even help businesses figure out the whole data protection officer thing, like whether to appoint someone in-house or just outsource it.
So it's a pretty comprehensive approach. But here's what I find interesting. Lumos LLC doesn't present LGPD compliance as like a chore, you know, just a box to tick. They actually frame it as this opportunity to build a culture of security. I like that.
Yeah, that's smart. In a world where data breaches are practically an everyday thing, being able to show everyone how committed you are to data privacy, that's a big advantage.
It's like a badge of honor.
Exactly. It tells your customers, hey, we take your privacy seriously. We're actively protecting your information.
And that can really make a difference when someone's deciding whether to do business with you or not, right?
Absolutely. Think about it. If you had to choose between two companies, one is known for protecting data, the other was just all over the news for a data breach, who are you going with?
Easy choice.
Exactly. Consumers are getting smarter about data privacy, and they're choosing to support businesses that make it a priority.
Okay, so we talked about the risks of not following the LGPD, and we got a peek at what Lumos LLC suggests we do about it. But what does this all mean for you, for our listener? What are the big takeaways you should be thinking about?
I think the biggest takeaway is this. You can't ignore the LGPD. It's too risky. The consequences of not doing anything, they're huge.
Right. And even though we've been looking at this through the lens of a consulting firm, the things they're bringing up, they're relevant for any business dealing with personal data in Brazil, right?
Absolutely. It doesn't matter if you're a tiny startup or a giant corporation. If you've got personal data from people in Brazil, the LGPD applies to you.
So what's next? Where do we go from here?
Well, I think it's time to actually dig into what the LGPD wants us to do. Let's unpack these 10 core principles that form the foundation of the whole law.
Okay, let's do it. We'll break down those principles and figure out what they mean for businesses in a way that actually makes sense.
Right. That's the plan. All right, so let's unpack these 10 principles at the core of the LGPD. They're not just some vague ideas, They really lay out how businesses should handle data protection.
Okay, so hit me with principle number 1.
Principle number 1 is all about purpose. You need a solid reason for collecting that personal data in the first place. It can't be just because you think it might be useful someday.
So no more data hoarding, just in case.
Exactly. That purpose needs to be specific, clearly defined, and this is key. You have to tell the person whose data you're collecting what that purpose is.
No more hiding behind vague terms.
Yeah.
Or burying it in a privacy policy that no one ever reads.
Exactly. Transparency is key.
Okay, what's next?
Next up is necessity. You should only be collecting the data that's absolutely necessary for that purpose you just defined. Don't go asking for someone's social security number if you only need their email address to send a newsletter.
Keep it lean, keep it relevant. Got it. What's principle number 3?
Number 3 is all about consent. Free, informed, and unambiguous consent. So people need to give you clear permission to collect and use their data, and they need to actually understand what they're agreeing to.
No more pre-checked boxes or sneaky wording in those consent forms.
Absolutely. And don't forget, people have the right to change their minds and withdraw their consent at any time. Your systems need to be able to handle that.
Okay, so consent is crucial. What's the 4th principle?
Principle number 4 is non-discrimination. This means you can't treat people differently based on whether they give you consent to collect their data.
So you can't deny someone a service or charge them more just because they didn't want to share certain information with you.
That's right. It's all about treating everyone fairly, regardless of how they feel about sharing their data. Principle number 5 focuses on data quality. Essentially, you're responsible for keeping that data accurate and up to date.
Which makes sense, because if you're working with bad data, you're probably going to make bad decisions.
Right. Exactly. Think about it. If a bank is using outdated financial information to decide whether to give someone a loan, that could lead to a really unfair outcome.
Okay, data quality, got it. What about principle number 6?
Number 6 is security. This one's pretty straightforward. You need to have appropriate security measures in place to protect that personal data. No unauthorized access, no unauthorized use, no unauthorized disclosure.
So strong passwords, encryption, regular security audits, all that good stuff.
Exactly. You've got to be proactive and minimize that risk of a data breach. Now, principle number 7 is prevention. It goes hand in hand with security. It's about thinking about how to prevent harm that might happen because of how you're processing data.
So it's not just about protecting the data itself, it's about thinking about the potential consequences of how that data gets used.
Exactly. Like if you're using algorithms to make decisions about loan applications or hiring, you've got to make sure those algorithms aren't biased or discriminatory.
Okay, prevention, what's next?
Principle number 8 is accountability. This means that businesses are responsible for showing everyone they're complying with the LGPD. It's not enough to just say you're compliant, you need to be able to prove it.
So documentation is really important here.
Absolutely. You need to have policies and procedures and records, things that show you're taking data protection seriously and actually meeting those LGPD requirements.
Okay, ready for principle number 9.
Hit me with it.
Number 9 is transparency. It goes back to that open communication we were talking about. You have to be upfront with people about how you're collecting, using, and protecting their data.
No more hiding behind complicated legal language or vague wording in those privacy policies.
Exactly. People have a right to know what's happening with their data. And finally, principle number 10 echoes that first principle, purpose. It reinforces that you should only process personal data for the original reason you collected it for. Unless, of course, you have a new legitimate purpose and you get consent again. It's like a full circle moment, reminding businesses that respecting data privacy is an ongoing responsibility, not a one-time thing.
Exactly. These 10 principles, when you put that all together, they paint a really clear picture of what it means to handle personal data responsibly under the LGPD.
Okay, so we've unpacked all 10 principles. But does the LGPD actually have any teeth? Are there real consequences if a business doesn't follow these principles?
Oh, absolutely. We talked about those fines earlier, which can be pretty hefty. But it's not just about the financial hit. The LGPD can also make you suspend your data processing activities, or even publicly announce that you violated the law.
Yeah, the public shaming is not something any business wants.
Right. That kind of damage to your reputation can be a disaster. But here's the thing, and Lumos LLC made this point really well. Complying with the LGPD can actually be good for your business. It's not just something you do to avoid getting in trouble.
I like that. Tell me more.
Think about it. Data breaches are all over the news these days, and people are more worried than ever about their online privacy. So if you can show that you're really committed to data protection, that can make you stand out from the crowd.
It's like a marketing advantage.
Exactly. It's a way to build trust with customers, make your reputation even better, and attract the best employees. People want to work for companies that share their values, and data privacy is becoming a core value for a lot of people.
It's like they say, doing the right thing is good business.
I like that. Now, there's one thing that Lumos LLC didn't really talk about in their document, and I think it's worth mentioning: the role of the Data Protection Officer, or DPO.
Okay, so what exactly is a DPO? What do they do?
A DPO is like the data privacy champion within a company. They make sure everyone in the company understands the rules and is following them.
Sounds like a pretty important role.
It is. The DPO gives advice on data protection matters, monitors compliance, handles requests from people who want to know what data you have about them, and they're the main point of contact with regulators.
So does every business need a DPO?
The LGPD says it's mandatory in some cases. Like if you're processing sensitive personal data on a large scale, or if your main business activities involve regularly monitoring people's data.
So not every business needs a dedicated DPO, but it's definitely something to think about. It depends on the type of data you handle and how much of it you have.
Exactly. And even if you're not legally required to have a DPO, it can still be a good idea. It shows you're serious about data protection, and it can help you stay on top of everything you need to do to comply with the law.
Okay, DPO check. What are some other practical things businesses can do to make sure they're following the LGPD?
Well, the first thing is to actually understand the law itself. The LGPD is a pretty complex piece of legislation, and it's important to have a good grasp of what it requires.
Right, you can't comply with something if you don't even understand it. What's next?
The next step is data mapping, which we talked about earlier. You need to figure out all the personal data your business collects, stores, and processes. It's like taking inventory of all your data assets.
So figuring out what you have, where it is, and why you have it.
Exactly. Once you have that clear picture of your data, you need to compare what you're doing now to what the LGPD requires. That's where the gap analysis comes in.
So you're comparing your current situation to where you need to be.
Right. And once you've found those gaps, you can start making a plan to fix them. You might need to update your privacy policies, strengthen your security measures, or train your employees.
It's like a roadmap to get you from non-compliant to compliant.
Exactly. And speaking of privacy policies, Lumos LLC mentioned those as part of their services, and they're super important for complying with the LGPD.
Okay, so what makes a good privacy policy under the LGPD?
A good privacy policy is clear, concise, and easy for anyone to understand. It needs to explain what data you collect, why you collect it, how you use it, how you protect it, and what rights people have over their own data.
So, no more hiding behind complicated legal terms or confusing language.
Exactly. Transparency is key, and that privacy policy needs to be easy to find. Don't bury it somewhere on your website where no one can find it. Make it easy for people to find and read.
Okay, privacy policy check. What about getting consent? We talked about that a bit earlier. But how do you actually get valid consent under the LGPD?
Consent has to be free-leaving, specific, informed, and unambiguous. People need to understand what they're saying yes to, and they need to actively choose to give their consent.
So no pre-checked boxes or bundling consent into other agreements.
Right. And remember, people can change their minds at any time, so you need a simple process for them to withdraw their consent.
Makes sense. Okay, consent check. What about data security? What kind of safeguards does the LGPD say businesses need to have in place?
The LGPD doesn't give you a specific checklist, but it does say that your security measures need to be appropriate for the level of risk involved.
So the more sensitive the data, the stronger the security needs to be.
Exactly. This could include things like encryption, access controls, intrusion detection systems, regular security audits. It's a multi-layered approach.
And it's not just about the technology, right? It's also about having good policies and procedures in place.
Absolutely. Things like data breach response plans, incident reporting procedures, and employee training programs.
So it's a holistic approach where technology and human processes work together to protect the data.
Right. And it's an ongoing process. The threats are constantly changing, so businesses need to adapt their security to stay ahead of the game.
It's like a never-ending game of cat and mouse. with the bad guys always trying to find new ways to get in.
Exactly. That's why it's so important to have a plan for what to do if a breach happens. You need to be ready to respond quickly and effectively to minimize the damage.
Okay, so we've covered security. What's next?
Let's talk about data subject rights. We've already touched on consent and the right to withdraw consent, but there are a few other important ones to keep in mind.
Okay, like what?
Individuals have the right to access their personal data, the right to correct any inaccurate data, the right to have their data erased in certain situations. It's often called the right to be forgotten. And they also have the right to restrict processing of their data and the right to data portability.
So if someone asks you to see all the data you have about them, you have to be ready to hand it over.
That's right. And you need to do it quickly and in a format that's easy for them to understand.
So no more hiding behind technical jargon or complicated file formats.
Exactly. It's about giving individuals control over their own data.
Okay, data subject rights check. What about transferring data to other countries? How does the LGPD handle that?
That's a good question. The LGPD puts limits on transferring personal data to countries that don't have strong data protection laws.
So you can't just send data anywhere you want.
Right. You need to make sure the country you're sending the data to has good data protection laws and safeguards in place. The LGPD outlines some ways to make sure there's adequate protection, like standard contractual clauses, binding corporate rules, and specific authorizations from the Brazilian Data Protection Authority.
So it's about making sure the data isn't protected, even if it crosses borders.
Exactly. It's something businesses need to think about carefully when they're doing business internationally.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground today. The 10 principles of the LGPD, the consequences of not complying, the role of the DPO, data mapping, privacy policies, consent, security, data subject rights, international data transfers. It's a lot to take in.
It is a lot, but I think we've given our listener a good understanding of this important law and what they can do to make sure they're complying with it.
Absolutely. But before we wrap up, I want to leave our listener with one final thought. The LGPD is just one piece of a much bigger puzzle.
What's really interesting is how the LGPD is changing how businesses think about data privacy, not just in Brazil, but all over the world.
I see what you mean. It's like the LGPD is part of a global movement towards stronger data protection.
Exactly. And that means better protection for individuals, no matter where they live or where their data goes.
That's a good thing. But it also means businesses have some work to do. They need to stay on top of these changing laws and regulations and adapt their practices.
It's a complex and constantly evolving landscape, but it's one that businesses can't afford to ignore.
Well said. So as we wrap up our deep dive into the LGPD, we want our listener to stay informed about data privacy, both in Brazil and around the world. And remember, data privacy is not just about checking boxes. It's about building trust. It's about reducing risk. And it's about creating a more ethical and responsible digital world.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Data privacy is not just a legal issue, it's a business issue, a societal issue. And in the end, it's a human issue.
Okay, so we know keeping up with the LGPD is super important, but how do you actually do it? It feels like there's just so much information flying around.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It can be overwhelming trying to stay on top of everything. But there are definitely some practical steps you can take.
All right, so what's a good starting point? Where do we even begin?
Well, I'd say a good place to start is by subscribing to some newsletters or blogs. Make sure they're from reputable sources, of course, ones that focus on data privacy in general, and the LGPD specifically.
So like industry publications, legal updates, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Those resources can be really valuable. They'll give you insights into new regulations, enforcement actions, best practices, all that good stuff.
Okay, so it's like having a cheat sheet to help navigate this crazy world of data privacy.
Pretty much.
What else can we do?
Attending webinars or conferences is another great way to stay updated. You can hear from experts firsthand, network with other people in your field, and really get a deeper understanding of what's going on.
Plus, they usually have pretty good snacks at those events.
Yeah, that's always a bonus. But seriously, networking is really important. Connecting with other professionals in your industry can be super helpful.
It's like a data privacy support group. You can share your challenges, brainstorm solutions, learn from each other's experiences.
Exactly. Now let's take a step back for a minute and think about the bigger picture. We've been focusing on the legal side of things and the risks of not complying, but I think it's also important to consider the broader impact of the LGPD.
Okay, I like where this is going. Let's get philosophical for a minute.
So, when you look at the LGPD, what do you see?
I see a real shift in how we think about data privacy. The LGPD and other laws like it around the world, They're challenging that old idea that data is just a commodity, something that can be bought and sold and shared without any consequences.
I agree. It's like we're moving away from that data as property mindset and towards a data as a human right mindset.
Right. And that has some pretty big implications for businesses, governments, and society as a whole.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The LGPD is making us ask some really important questions, like what does it actually mean to respect people's privacy in the digital age? And how do we balance the benefits of data-driven innovation with the need to protect individual rights?
Those are tough questions.
They are. But I think the LGPD is a step in the right direction. It's a clear message that data privacy is important and that businesses need to step up and be more responsible.
It's like we're at a crossroads, and the LGPD is showing us a path where data privacy is a core value, not just something we think about after the fact.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Okay, so as we wrap up our deep dive into the LGPD today, I want to leave our listeners feeling empowered, not overwhelmed.
It's all about doing the right thing. Protecting people's data isn't just about following the law, it's about being ethical and responsible.
Exactly. And you don't have to do this alone. There are so many resources out there to help you understand the law, work through any challenges, and build a strong culture of data privacy within your organization.
So take a deep breath, do your research, and get started.
It's a journey worth taking for your business and for the people whose data you're responsible for.
Well said.
All right, that's a wrap for our deep dive into the LGPD. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
Until next time, keep diving deep.